Morning, Ollie. Morning, Mary. Good morning, listeners.
Now, today you are going to talk about Mrs Wiseman, mother of Cardinal Wiseman, first Roman Catholic cardinal since the reign of Henry VIII.
She had a beautiful name of Xaviera Strange. The family came from Waterford originally. They got land.
Sorry, Eamonn, that was her actual name, Xaviera Strange.
Yeah,
nice name.
Yeah, strange. Strange name. Yeah.
Literally.
I think it originally was Strong and got changed around as translations.
Strange that.
It became Strange. Yeah, and she was born in Aylwardstown, but like the family had city connections here as well, in 1773, and she was married in what I mentioned before, the big chapel. The Catholics couldn't have a cathedral at that time, so she was baptised in the big chapel shortly after she was born in 1773. She had two brothers, Paul and Peter, and they went off. Being Catholics, of course, they felt they couldn't flourish in Ireland at the time, so they went off to Seville in Spain and then moved to Cadiz. They're mentioned in the records of that city as great merchants, and they're down as Pedro and Pablo de Strange. On the other side, the man she married, I'll talk about him now, and his name was Wiseman, and again, a Waterford man from a merchant family, exactly the same story. They felt they'd do better in Spain than staying in Ireland under the penal laws. He first married a woman called Marina Dunphy. She produced a number of daughters with him, and she died in 1793, so around the time the big chapel was being demolished and the cathedral was being built. He decided then to move to London because his business was really between Spain and London. This was very typical of the time. The Catholic merchants from Ireland would be the link between the Protestant merchants in England and the Spanish Catholic merchants in Spain, so there's a great business going on, and Waterford had huge connections with Spain at this time in its history. He met Xaviera, and they got married in London in 1800. They had two sons and a daughter. The first son was called James, and the second son Nicholas, and Nicholas is the man who becomes really famous, and they had a daughter. But they actually moved back to Spain, and if you go to Seville today, there's a fine big house in the centre of Seville, and they have a lovely plaque on it, and they're boasting the fact that she lived there with her husband, and that it was here that the famous cardinal was born. So unfortunately for her, she only married him in 1800, and he died, her husband died in 1804.
Gosh.
So Xaviera then was left minding both his own children and her own three children, so his children from his previous marriage. So she decided to move back to Waterford. The two sons were educated here in Waterford. Then Nicholas, of course, was the brightest of the two. He was sent then to a Catholic school in England, and from there, of course, he was very brilliant. He was sent to Rome. He was then sent back to England and became president of Ascot College. In England at the time, of course, since the Reformation, since the time of Henry VIII, they couldn't use titles like cardinal, or the Roman Catholics couldn't use these titles. The Pope couldn't appoint people. But in England, after Catholic emancipation, they decided in 1850 to allow Roman Catholics use titles, and he became the Archbishop of Westminster. And that was a new diocese established in 1850. He kind of is in a difficult position. There was still a lot of anti-Catholic feeling in England at the time, and even old English Catholics, and these would be even aristocrats that remained Roman Catholic in England, English people, didn't really like upsetting things too much and Rome being too influential. So he had to look after these kind of old English aristocrats as well as the new Catholic population of England, and of course all the emigrant Irish and the emigrant coming in that were Roman Catholics into England. So he had to kind of balance himself very, very carefully between all that, and there was a lot of opposition to him. But in the end, he was successful, and he did manage to work on that. He came back to Waterford in 1858, and he was given a kind of a hero's welcome here in Waterford, and he celebrated Mass out at Aylwardstown, and there was big triumphal procession through the city of Waterford when he arrived here. And of course, it was seen as a great honour to have a cardinal, the first cardinal since the time of King Henry VIII in Britain and Ireland, and the fact that this man had a Waterford mother and was educated here in Waterford was seen as a great cause of celebration. Sadly, Xaviera, his mother, whom we have this beautiful little miniature, it's a tiny thing, it was painted on ivory, it would fit in the palm of your hand, it's in a little gold frame, and I would like to thank the Civic Trust in Waterford for purchasing that for the museum. Sadly, Xaviera died in 1851, so she didn't see her son come back here in triumph to Waterford in 1858.
All right, Eamonn, listen, really, really interesting as always. We'll put it up online later for people to want to listen back, and WRFM.com is where you can listen back to all of Eamonn's virtual tours. Eamonn, thanks a million. Chat to you tomorrow.
Thanks, Eamonn.
Thanks, Mary.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, listeners.